Hi there, I'm Joe Ty, and I was scheduled to meet you in person for a conference this year, which was canceled because of the latest COVID surge. And that conference will be rescheduled. I look forward to seeing you in person. But there are several things that are just so important because of surging COVID that I really wanted to share now in this shorter video. First of all, a little about me. I am the head coach at Values Coach. We work with hospitals on building a culture of ownership, have written many books on it. Actually, Florence Nightingale helped me with the Florence prescription. Our core curriculum is a course on values-based life and leadership skills called the 12 Core Action Values. This is the Culture of Ownership classroom at Midland Health in Midland, Texas. I live on a small farmstead in Iowa, but my second home is a tent in the Grand Canyon. And if your hospital ever needs a volunteer baby cuddler, why, I'm your guy, give me a call. So let's get started. This is the picture that I used for my New Year greeting this year. It's exactly the same as the one I used last year, except I just changed 2021 to 2022. And I think that's a great metaphor for what people are going through now. It's we're having to go through this again and again, and we think that maybe it's not even over yet. Admiral Eric Olson, retired, wrote an article in the McKinsey Quarterly on the war on the coronavirus. And what he said is so important. He said, you must not sacrifice culture in a crisis. Culture left untended is going to go somewhere where you don't want it to go. And once it does, it's impossible to get it back. It's the paradox that the harder it is to work on culture, the less time you have, the more important it is that you do so. And that's what all of these strategies are going to be about. And you know, in football, the red zone is the last 20 yards. And anyone who's ever played football or participated in any sport knows that the closer you get to the goal line, to the finish line, the harder it is. And we're somewhere right now, we all hope at least, in that red zone where we're closer to the flickering light at the end of the tunnel, but the work is even harder. AACN, the Association of Critical Care Nurses, has a new website called Hear Us Out, encouraging people to get vaccinated to help our hospitals. And look what they said. A hospital without nurses cannot save your life. Our healthcare system is at risk because our people have been pushed to the breaking point and in some cases beyond. And they cite their own survey of 6,500 critical care nurses. 9 out of 10 say that the pandemic has depleted their careers. 6+ out of 10 thinking about leaving nursing after it's over. And 3/4 say that people who choose to not be vaccinated are undermining nurses' well-being. This is something I would spend a little more time on, but I just want to mention it to you. The thing that most people, including politicians and editorial writers, are not appreciating is that healthcare is the canary in the coal mine of our economy. Healthcare is 20% of GDP. In many communities, hospitals are the #1 employer, and in many families, caregivers are the #1 breadwinner. And to the extent that the pandemic is dragging down the healthcare system, it's inevitable that we'll start to drag down the economy at large. And to the extent that costs go up in healthcare, as in paying more for travel nurses, it is inevitable that we will help to fuel inflation in the economy. And so one of the things that we as healthcare leaders need to do is get across to our political leaders and our opinion makers that we have to deal with this pandemic much more aggressively and seriously than we have. So let's look at the leadership strategies that I'm going to recommend for you. #1, this is the best time to engage your team in a real meaningful dialogue about values. And what are the values that we have seen reflected in the pandemic? Take the plaque off the wall and think about whether it's time to revise it. In the surveys we've been doing over the past year, I often ask the question, what values have you seen reflected in your team during the pandemic? And far and away, #1 is courage or some synonym. People talk about the courage to take care of a COVID patient, the perseverance, the determination to come back day after day. And perseverance is nothing more than courage that endures over time. I see things like fellowship and teamwork. And if those things aren't in your current statement of values, maybe they should be. The other question I ask is, what values would you put into your hospital statement of values going forward? Far and away, number one, not even anything else close, is something related to taking care of the individual, work-life balance, making sure that people are taking care of themselves. And again, if something about your taking care of your people as people isn't in your statement of core values, well, maybe it should be. Strategy number two, when it comes to thinking about your culture, assess, don't assume. We've been doing surveys, as I mentioned, over the past couple of years. When we do surveys of managers who are not at the front line in nursing, 6 out of 10 respond to this question: how are your management members holding up? 6 out of 10 say they're doing pretty well. They're stressed, but doing pretty well. And only 3% say we're really at a crisis level. I do the same survey for nursing leaders and look at the response. Only 2 out of 10 say that we're doing okay, we're stressed, but holding up well. And nearly half say the current level of burnout is not sustainable, or we're going to face significant turnover. And in some areas, it's even worse. I spent a day late in 2021 with 50 plus leaders from New Mexico, nurse leaders at the New Mexico Organization for Nurse Leaders conference. And 60% of them said this is not sustainable. And I'll tell you, in New Mexico, it's gotten worse since we did this survey. This was live polling where people were actually right there, so they understood what the question was. We've had hundreds of open comments on these surveys. This is fairly typical. I have never seen such an extraordinary exodus in the 25 years I've been a critical care nurse. And this individual said, people tell me they don't feel supported or appreciated by management or the community. And we see comments like that at a distressing level. In his classic book, The Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien had Gandalf the Wizard show up where he was most needed but least expected. And that is one of the most important things that your leadership team can do, beyond formal assessments of how people are doing. And by the way, once a year, an employee satisfaction or engagement survey ain't nearly enough. You can just show up, not without a script. Show up and ask people, how are you doing? What can we do to help? Do you have what you need? And if not, what can we get for you? This is one of the comments that really broke my heart. A nurse leader responded, "My heart is broken over what has happened to our hospital." And we've seen lots of comments in that same vein. And here's something else that we see. Not always, it's not a universal, but a lot. The farther away somebody is from the bedside, or the higher they are on the organization chart, the rosier the glasses that they tend to wear when they talk about their culture. Strategy number 3, be very vigilant in screening for emotional problems, emotional trauma, and prepare now for what we call COVID's emotional long haulers. There's an article forthcoming in Nursing Management that I wrote with several nurse leaders from California. And we compared the pandemic to Halley's Comet that comes around every 76 years, but it drags a long tail behind it. And long after the pandemic is gone, once the virus is endemic, there's going to be a long tail of personal grief, emotional trauma, career, financial, family dislocation, anger, anxiety. And you, as a healthcare leader, you need to prepare for that now, because it is inevitable. When you ask someone, how you doing? And they say, I'm fine, chances are what they're really saying is, I'm frustrated, insecure, negative, and exhausted. A corollary, we use terms like burnout, PTSD, moral injury, all in the same sentence, as if they're at least comparable, but they're very different things. Burnout is a long-term exhaustion and level of cynicism that occurs over a period of time. PTSD is the emotional response to a traumatic incident or being observer of a traumatic incident or series of incidents, like the one nurse who said, I zipped up more body bags in 1 week than in the entire rest of my career. That person is at risk of PTSD. And the thing about PTSD is that it doesn't happen immediately. It's not like a broken arm or a heart attack. It sneaks up over time and insidious. The third thing is moral injury. That is when somebody has to make a decision or take an action that somehow violates their sense of values. The critical care nurse who has to take care of 5 patients and knows that with 5 patients, he or she cannot give the optimal quality or assure the safety that they want to, that person has a moral injury. They can honor one value, taking care of all of them, only at the expense of not honoring another, giving each one the very best. And you have to recognize there's going to be a level of anger. And you have to be honest with yourself about it. Here's something else that we're seeing increasingly in our work and in the surveys we do. This is one of the comments from a nurse leader. Some bedside nurses are becoming uncharacteristically judgmental of anti-vax patients who are in the hospital. We're seeing that a lot, and we're seeing that increasingly. And this is something new in healthcare. You know, in healthcare, we have really never taken anger out on a lung cancer patient who is a smoker, on a head injury patient who wasn't wearing a helmet on a motorcycle. But because people who are choosing to not be vaccinated are overwhelming hospitals, and they're putting caregivers at risk and sometimes their families at risk, there is a level of anger, and you need a strategy for how do we deal with that anger. Strategy number 4. Show your people that you have their backs. People in healthcare today feel much more at risk than they did even before the pandemic. You know, 2 years ago, we were healthcare heroes, and today people go to a grocery store in their scrubs and they get yelled at. Katie Boston Leary, my friend from ANA and colleagues of hers, wrote an article on workplace safety, making nurses' safety a priority. And look what they said. Violence and bullying at work are 2 of the top 12 hazards that nurses consider to be a risk in the workplace. This was written before the pandemic. It has gotten a lot worse. Here are some of the things hospitals have done. You may have seen this. The CEOs of the 9 largest healthcare systems in Minnesota did a full-page public service ad saying, we're heartbroken, we're overwhelmed, pleading with people to get vaccinated and wear a mask and stop overwhelming their hospitals. Some organizations have addressed head-on the risk of violence that we're seeing toward our caregivers. Scripps Health in San Diego has very visible posters saying, if you assault one of our caregivers, we will back up that caregiver in a criminal charge against you. WellSpan Health in York, Pennsylvania has teamed up with their local police department, and they now have 4 police officers on site at WellSpan, sending a clear message to patients and family members, you can't abuse our people, but also sending a clear message to the team, we've got your back. We're going to do whatever we can to protect you from any violence or abusive behavior by outsiders. Strategy number 5, and this, now we're gonna get away from the things that were kind of negative and depressing into things that are more positive and fun. As soon as you possibly can, redo employee orientation, and I mean for everybody. This is a new day. We've got the pandemic behind us. We've been thinking about our values. Maybe we've redone our value statement. We have a new statement of cultural philosophy. Let's share some of the lessons that we've learned. It's been 2 years since we've been able to meet in person. We have some employees who did orientation virtually. Let's all get together in groups, in person, and do a new employee orientation, just as if we were starting a greenfield hospital from the ground up. Related to that, we have Nurses in Hospital Week coming up in May. For the last 2 years, we have not been able to do things except virtually. This year, hopefully we'll be beyond that. Make a big deal of Nurses Week, of Hospital Week. Don't settle for a cupcake and a 1-minute video from the CEO saying thank you. do something that is big, extraordinary, because it's been too long. Strategy number 7, start with your management team. Recognize that your managers are probably under more pressure than anybody else. And, we worry about attrition and the great resignation and frontline caregivers, but your managers are probably under more pressure than anybody else, especially the frontline managers. And I mentioned moral injury earlier. The manager who has to look a nurse in the eyes and say, I know you're exhausted. I know you're not having time with your family. I know you need to get away from this hospital for a day or so, but I can't let you. I need to ask you to work another shift tomorrow. That nurse manager is suffering moral injury. To honor one value, taking care of the patients, she has to not honor another value, taking care of her team. It's what psychologists call a double bind, a lose-lose situation where no matter what you do, what you're choosing is the least of bad options. And many of our managers have experienced that consistently. Just start with your management team, helping them deal with some of the anger, the frustration, the moral injury they may have experienced during this pandemic. Strategy number 8, promote the NEDLOG rule. Now, don't try to look that word up. I made it up. NEDLOG is the word golden spelled backwards. The NEDLOG rule is the golden rule in reverse. Anything that you would do for somebody else, if they asked you, be willing to ask for that same help if you need it. And what that will do, if you promote that rule throughout your organization, it will help reduce the stigma that people have seeking mental health. The longitudinal surveys of AONL, the American Organization for Nursing Leadership, show that there is still a significant perceived stigma for admitting that you have emotional or mental health challenges and that you need help. And it shows that the younger generational cohorts, it's even worse. Do anything you can to say it's okay to say you're not okay. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to practice the NEDLOG rule as well as the golden rule. Strategy number 9, and this may be the most important one. In his classic book, The True Believer, Eric Hoffer wrote, anyone who would change the world or a corner of the world must have the ability to spark and fan what he called an extravagant hope for a better future. And you may have heard people say hope is not a strategy. Well, true enough, but that's the stupidest thing you can say, because without hope, even the most brilliant strategy is doomed to failure. And in that sense, you should make it a strategy. What is our strategy for helping our people sustain their hope, an extravagant hope, through this challenging time, through whatever we're going through? And strategy number 10 is much more specific. Share Stay Strong for Us with your entire team and encourage them to talk about it in group huddles. Stay Strong for Us is a book I put together. It's an ebook. It's a beautiful ebook. It's on the Stay Strong for Us website. It's a free ebook. I asked more than 100 healthcare leaders, authorities on human wellness and motivation, frontline caregivers, and others to share a message of hope and courage and resilience. And we put it together in this beautiful and free ebook. You'll know some of the people, maybe many of the people who are participating. Mark and Bonnie Barnes, the co-founders of the Daisy Foundation, Jane Engelbright at the time, Chief Nurse Executive for HCA. One of my favorites, Tracy Churchill, a nurse leader from Queensland, Australia. She wrote, "A world without you in it." Imagine a world if you are no longer in the nursing profession. And these are beautiful messages. Encourage people in a huddle to adopt one. Ask somebody to talk about what Penny Beatty wrote about unpacking your week. It'll take a couple minutes or less, but it will help you inspire and spark and fan that extravagant hope that we need to have. Now, last year, Quint Studer asked me to record a 1-hour video on courageous leadership for this age of anxiety for his EntreCon conference, and I did. And we've taken that and broken it down into 10 6-minute videos, and they're posted on the staystrongforus.com website. You have to scroll down to the bottom. And what I'd recommend you do is ask your leadership team to watch these. Maybe do one a week. It's 6 minutes, and then in a huddle, whether virtually or in person, have somebody report out, what does leadership CPR plus VH mean for us? And by the way, it means courage, perseverance, resilience, plus vision and hope. And for our nurse leaders on this call, please, please, please attend AONL 2022 in San Antonio in April. It's been too long since you've gotten away from the hospital, met with other nurse leaders. Tell your CEO or whoever needs to be convinced, this is not an option. We need to be there. I need to come back with new information. I need to fly the flag for our hospital. Oh, and by the way, we probably are in full out recruiting mode. Maybe I'll find some people that we can talk to. And for those who go, stop by the Values Coach booth number 809. We are going to have the biggest, baddest booth in the entire exhibit hall. And we're going to be talking about strategies for inspired, courageous leadership in this age of anxiety. Let me wrap up with one last thing. This was a man who led his team through some incredibly difficult challenges, Napoleon Bonaparte. And Napoleon got a letter from one of his generals. That general was on the field. He was outnumbered, outgunned. He'd been outmaneuvered. And he said, I despair of winning this upcoming battle. And Bonaparte wrote him back. And he said, keep your spirits up. Don't allow yourself to be depressed, and never for one moment doubt, but that matters will finish better and more quickly than you imagine. See, Napoleon understood that hope is a strategy. He understood that without hope, no matter how brilliant your strategy is, it will fail. And at the time of the battle, his general and his men went with hope, and they prevailed on the battlefield. Hope is a strategy, and it's job number one for us as healthcare leaders. Let me wrap up. This is how you contact me. I'm happy to help in any way at any time that is possible. I'm best reached by email. I'm also on LinkedIn. That's our website. Feel free to call our office anytime, or to call or text me at my cell phone number. I will look forward to seeing you when we finally are able to meet back again in person. And until then, stay strong. Stay strong for yourself, for your team, for your family, the people you serve, for your community. Stay strong for us. Thank you.